For today's video, I'm going to be sharing my guppy care guide based on my experiences while keeping these awesome little fish, and I'll also be sharing some tips and tricks along the way. My goal is to give you a more realistic idea of what to expect, as well as how you can care for your guppies successfully, because unfortunately they are not as hardy as they once were. So let's start by talking about tank size, since that's easily the most common question that I get when it comes to guppies. The right tank size will vary depending on how many guppies you want to keep, as well as if you plan to breed them. For example, in one of my tanks, which is a 25 litre or 6.6 US gallon setup, I keep 4 male guppies as well as about 80 to 100 cherry shrimp depending on the time of year, and it works perfectly fine. I've also successfully kept guppies in larger tanks, and as a general guideline for a guppy only tank without any other fish, I aim to keep 1 male guppy per gallon of water, provided you have the proper filtration to maintain safe and stable water parameters. I know that might go against what a lot of other online sources say, but this is specifically for male only guppy tanks. Male guppies are around half the size of females, so they require less food while also producing less waste, so you can comfortably keep more of them in the same tank. If you're planning on keeping a female only guppy tank, I'd recommend you stick to up to 1 female per 2 US gallons of water, provided you're not thinking of keeping any other species of fish in the tank. Now the real challenge is when it comes to breeding tanks, because guppies breed a lot and it really doesn't take much for a tank to become overpopulated with baby guppy fry. That's why I personally don't usually recommend starting out with a breeding tank, as it's easy to get overwhelmed with your setup. But if you are planning to set up a guppy breeding tank, I'd recommend you oversize the aquarium and then intentionally understock it so you have plenty of extra space available for the fry when they eventually come. Now it is worth noting that some online sources do suggest that guppies mainly hang out near the surface level of an aquarium, but as you can see in the video footage, mine have never done this, and while they do spend a lot of time near the surface, they are more than happy to explore the entire water column of the tank. On top of that, guppies are very active swimmers, so if you can, opt to get a rectangular tank rather than a cube or orb, as it gives them way more horizontal swim space, keeping them as happy as possible. So now that you have a rough idea of the right tank size for your specific setup, let's talk about actually setting the tank up. Now there's a lot of variables to consider based on your experience level, but if you are an absolute beginner looking to set up their very first guppy tank, I highly recommend that you use a filter, a heater and a light. Now it is true that you can skip some of these with the right setup, but this hobby can have a steep learning curve and there's a lot of things to learn at the very beginning, so sticking with those 3 basic tank accessories can help you avoid some very common problems. For filtration, a properly sized hang-on back filter is my personal favourite, but a sponge filter will work perfectly fine provided it is large enough for your tank while also paired with an appropriately powered air pump. For example, there's no point in using a 40-gallon tank with a sponge filter that's sized for a 40-gallon tank and then powering it by a tiny piezoelectric air pump designed for a 10-gallon tank, because the water flow's just not going to be there to make that much of a benefit. Thankfully, there are plenty of air pumps on the market these days, and it's really easy to find something that's suitable for larger tanks if needed. As for heaters, I personally like the Hygge Nano heaters for my smaller aquariums and the Fluval T series for my medium to large tanks. A good rule of thumb that I personally stick to is to try and get as close as possible to the heater having 1 watt of power per litre of water in the tank to try and keep your water temperature as stable as possible. When it comes to lighting, the Seora SR616 is my go-to recommendation if you're only planning on growing beginner-friendly plants, as it promotes healthy growth in all of the tanks I use it. On top of that, it's also an excellent budget-friendly display light for your guppies if you're not even planning on keeping live plants in there, because its low price tag and high lumen output make it very easy to see what's actually happening in your tank. If you're looking to keep medium to advanced category plants that require stronger lighting, then the Haiger 957 is an excellent choice, and I use that one on multiple tanks too, and I consistently get great results. Now, cycling your tank is an entirely different video, and while you can do a fishing cycle, I personally believe that the dark start method is the best option, where you'll fully cycle the tank before adding fish or plants. I have a dedicated video going over that method in a lot more detail, and I'll link to that in the video description, but in short, you match the bioload of your tank to your expected stocking level and build up the microorganism colonies that'll deal with toxic compounds such as ammonia and nitrite, and then you'll cycle the tank before you add your plants or guppies to keep everything safe. In my opinion, live plants are also an excellent option when it comes to setting up your guppy tank, because they'll help maintain safe and stable water parameters by using up toxins in the water as nutrients, but they also provide a lot of hiding spots. The beginner-friendly varieties of species like Anubias, Cryptocorenes, Echinodorus, Rotala, Bacopa and Hygrophila are all great picks that are very easy to keep in my experience. Now, caring for live plants can feel like an extra challenge if you are a beginner, and it does add additional learning to your initial startup needs, but if you don't want to take the live plant route, then modern artificial plants can work and they'll still provide plenty of hiding spots. Now, you might be wondering why I think hiding spots are so important for a guppy tank, and there's several reasons. If you're keeping a male-only guppy setup, then the guppies will often spar to establish and maintain their hierarchy, and the non-dominant males need somewhere to retreat to and hide just to get a break from the attention from the alpha. In breeding tanks, females can also be overwhelmed from the attention from the male guppies, so they also need spaces to get away and hide at times. And if you are breeding your guppies, then the fry or baby guppies also benefit from having hiding spots to avoid being eaten by their parents. In addition to plants or artificial plants, driftwood, rocks and aquarium decorations can all serve as excellent hiding spots in the right setup. Now, many people who keep planted tanks use aqua soil, which can lower your tank's pH by releasing excess hydrogen ions into the water, and this may pull your water parameters out of the ideal range for guppies. Now, there's several substrates in the hobby that are completely inert and will not tweak your water parameters, like the gravel I use in this Medaka tank that's powered by an undergravel filter, and that will leave your pH as it is. But if you really want to use aqua soil in your guppy tank, then you can use something like Sirius stone or any other limestone based rock as your hardscape, because they will release calcium carbonate into the tank's water and raise pH and hardness to balance out the aqua soil. I've personally used this combination in several tanks, and in my experience the Sirius stone typically wins out, maintaining hardness levels that are within their expected ranges for guppies. So now that you have your tank set up, let's talk about water parameters, starting with temperature. Technically, healthy wild guppies are fine in a water temperature ranging from 17 to 28 degrees Celsius or 63 to 82 degrees Fahrenheit. However, due to extensive inbreeding with captive bred guppies over the years, they often thrive in warmer water at the middle and upper end of that range. My fish room naturally stays at the bottom of this water temperature range during the winter, but I still added a Haiger nano heater and set it at 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit as a backup to keep the guppies happy. I know some people who've been able to keep guppies at slightly cooler temperatures than that without issue, while I also know some who've tried it and run into issues, so personally I don't want to go below 20 degrees Celsius in my own tanks moving forward. It's also worth noting that water temperature will affect the metabolism and overall life cycle of your guppies. In warmer water, they tend to grow faster, mature earlier, breed more, but also have shorter lifespans, while in cooler water, generally the opposite is true. Moving on to pH, and guppies tend to prefer a pH range of from 7.0 up to 8.5, and unfortunately, my tap water is fairly soft with a pH of around 6.4. But there are several methods available to passively increase the pH of your aquarium, and I've tried crushed coral by putting it both in the back of my aquarium or in a filter if there's space to put it in there to increase the pH level as it dissolves into the water. Aragonite sand is another option, but I don't have any personal experience with it, but it does have a great reputation in the hobby of being able to passively increase your tank's pH. As I touched on earlier though, these days I focus on using limestone based rocks like Sirius stone as my hardscape, or at least part of my hardscape in the tank, as it's popular among aquascapers, easy to find and relatively cheap. The Sirius stone will sit in your aquarium and release calcium carbonate into the water to increase both pH and hardness, getting them within the ranges for your guppies. Speaking of water hardness, anything from 8 up to 30 DGH is usually recommended for guppies. Again, if you have soft tap water like myself, then something like Sirius stone can help boost this into a healthy, suitable range. I know I touched on cycling your tank before adding guppies earlier, and again I link to my dedicated video on the dark start method that I recommend in this video's description if you want to check it out. But this is important and often overlooked because it'll help make sure that both toxic ammonia and toxic nitrite levels remain at 0 ppm and keep your fish safe right from the start. So, now that your tank is set up and your water parameters are in good shape, it's time to actually get some guppies and stock your aquarium. Now I'm going to be jumping between video footage of a few different guppy strains that I've kept over the years for this section, so you can see that there is an absolutely huge variety available. This amount of diversity in their colour and pattern is one of the main reasons that guppies are such a popular choice in the hobby today. Personally, I love the Cobra Guppy pattern regardless of the colour that supplements it, but there's countless of other types of guppies and tail types out there, but keep in mind that certain tail types can affect a fish's ability to swim. Unfortunately, because a lot of guppy lines have been inbred for literally decades to achieve these stunning colours and patterns, they are nowhere near as hardy as they once were. In my experience, one of the easiest ways to find healthy, affordable guppies is to opt for the assorted or mutt guppy option. Unlike line-bred guppies, which are often bred with their siblings to promote specific genetic traits, mutt guppies and assorted guppies are usually just bred in volume by mixing many different guppy lines together to get as many fry as possible for large chain stores. The greater amount of genetic diversity in this specific type of guppies can make them less prone to the health issues that the line-bred, specialist fancy guppy strains can consistently have. On top of that, for the most part at least, assorted or mutt guppies are generally far cheaper than the specialist strain guppies. And I want to quickly share a personal experience that I had when I bought 30 high-grade guppies for one of my tanks, but within weeks, the majority of them were showing signs of fungal growth and possible tail rot, even though the water parameters were perfectly fine, confirmed by a thriving breeding Neocaridina shrimp colony. From what I've seen on social media, issues like these are unfortunately quite common in the hobby regardless of the fish species, but there is one common link. To reduce the risk of this happening to you when buying guppies online, look for some type of disclaimer in the description stating that the fish won't be shipped for up to 2 weeks, because this usually means that the seller is just a middleman who doesn't actually have the fish on site. Outlets like these usually take a lot of orders at the same time, and then they'll order the fish in from overseas fish breeders, and then once the fish are delivered, they'll forward them on to you without holding them in their own tanks to see if the fish are healthy or have any infections. Unfortunately, I learned my lesson the hard way, and it took me a while to realise that this is what's actually happening, so hopefully that little tip will be able to help prevent the issue happening with you. These days, I personally prefer to buy my fish in person so I can see them in the tank, watch how they are actually behaving and how they're swimming around, and look for any potential problems with the fish. Now, I know this isn't an option for everyone, either due to living in a remote area or having low quality aquatic shops in your city, so some people have to buy their fish online. My top tip for this would be to take the time to look for a seller who has the fish in their care and will list in the description that they will ship them within 24 hours of receiving payment. But even if you do get a fish that is free from any type of infection, sometimes genetic problems appear due to the excessive inbreeding the species has gone through. For example, I recently purchased a breeding pair of endlers and the males started to have what looked like seizures. I had this exact same problem with one of my betta fish last year, and when I was researching the condition, it does seem that provided your test kit confirms your water parameters are fine and there's no causes of stress in the tank, that the most common issue is genetic problems. From what I've read online, this can range from initial problems with the nervous system in the fish to internal tumours developing and applying pressure to the fish's brain or spine, causing it to have seizures. Now, I don't want to be too negative here and accidentally put you off getting guppies because they really are excellent fish, but on the flip side of that, I also want to be truthful and share my experiences because I've had some absolute nightmares. But you can still get some healthy fancy guppies that are perfectly fine, like my metallic blue lace guppies shown in the video that are constantly active. I've had them for months and months and months now without any issue, and they are constantly looking for food in the tank. But like I mentioned earlier, in my opinion at least, if you do want the highest chance possible of getting the healthiest guppies you can, going for the cheaper assorted or mutt guppies are going to be the best option because of their increased genetic diversity. So at this stage, with any luck, you've managed to get yourself some healthy guppies and you've added them to your tank, so we need to start thinking about feeding them. Fortunately, unlike some other fish species I keep, guppies are not picky eaters in the slightest and they've eaten pretty much everything I've gave them without issue. On top of that, they've also tried to eat everything I've gave their shrimp tank mates without issue, even if they've just had their own food. As a staple, I like to alternate between giving my guppies Fluval Bug Bites Light Blue formula and Hikari micro pellets each day. This strategy helps vary the main ingredient in their diet, with black soldier fly larvae in the bug bites and fish and krill meal in the micro pellets. For treats, I've gave mine bloodworms, daphnia, cyclops and brine shrimp, but as far as I can tell they definitely seem to prefer the daphnia. I also feed my shrimp Hikari mini algae wafers each day, and despite their name, their primary ingredient is actually fish meal. Now it does take a while for the water to soften these up, but once they get soft, my guppies like to happily swim down and peck at them and push the shrimp out of the way because they think it's an extra snack for them. Being omnivores, guppies will happily graze on detritus and soft algae types in their tank too, and some of my guppies have been particularly prone to eating algae, which helps manage it in your tank. Now, portion control can be tricky with guppies, and there's a lot of advice out there that is overwhelming, and in the end I ended up just ignoring it and coming up with my own thing. Currently, I feed my guppies twice per day, either giving them 2 Fluval Bug Bites Light Blue formula that is the smallest granule size, or 4 Hikari micro pellets per male guppy each time. As I mentioned earlier, female guppies are larger, so you might want to increase the serving size if you are keeping females. I know that might sound like a small amount of food, but remember, I feed my shrimp every single day, and my guppies also like to help themselves to the shrimp food, as well as picking at detritus and algae in the tank, topping up their nutritional needs. So moving on, I want to talk about actually breeding your guppies, as this is a large section of the hobby for a lot of people. It's probably a good idea to go over how you can easily tell males from females too, because this can be challenging if you're new to the hobby, but thankfully with guppies it is very straightforward. Male guppies have a modified anal fin called a gonopodium, which is long and thin and very easy to see, whereas female guppies have a regular triangular anal fin and they are usually larger in size, while the adult males are often more colourful too. As I mentioned earlier, I'm still very new to breeding live bearers, and I actually started with endless live bearers, which are currently considered a separate species in the same genus as guppies. However, there is an ongoing scientific debate about whether endlers are truly their own unique species or just a variety of guppies that's from a different location. Regardless, breeding guppies and endlers is extremely easy. Essentially, you can take a healthy male and female that are of breeding age and add them to a properly cycled tank that can handle their bioload and leave them for nature to take its course. Many people recommend you keep at least 2 females per male to disperse the male's attention, while some people suggest 3 or even 4 per male. But it is important to keep in mind that the more pregnant females you have in your tank, the faster your population is going to grow. It's also worth noting that female guppies can store sperm for up to 6 months after a mating session, so you need to keep this in mind if you're switching your female guppies between a breeding section and a female-only tank. For the most part, you're going to know your female guppy is carrying young if you see a dark gravid spot near her anal fin, which is the same stage my female endler is at right now. With any luck, she'll give birth soon, and the fry will be smart enough to hide in the plant cover in that tank to avoid being eaten by their mother. I plan to feed the fry Hikari first bites, as it's been a great option when I raised my Medaka ricefish and White Cloud Mountain minnow fry. It's also worth pointing out that guppies, endlers and mollies can all crossbreed with each other, and there's some absolutely beautiful endler guppy hybrids in the hobby these days. Depending on how inbred the endler guppy hybrid line has been over the last couple of years, it can actually end up being far healthier than regular guppies due to having the mixed genetics. I'll be honest though, breeding fish really isn't a major focus of mine in the hobby, so if you specifically want to keep guppies with the goal of breeding them, I'd highly recommend you do more in-depth research with something like the Albert's Guppy Adventure channel on YouTube, where breeding guppies is his main focus. Because guppies breed so prolifically, it's important to touch on how to prevent overpopulation, which is a common issue for a lot of fish keepers. If you haven't actually stocked your guppy tank yet, the easiest solution by far is to opt for an all-male guppy tank, with this being the strategy that I've used in all of my tanks until very recently. Obviously, with no females in the tank, there's no breeding occurring, and on top of that, with guppies, the males are often the more colourful, adding plenty of visual appeal to your aquarium. This approach also avoids accidentally purchasing a female guppy that's already been fertilised and storing sperm, resulting in babies being produced for months to come. Now, some sources do claim that male-only guppy tanks can lead to more aggression, but I've kept 5 different male-only guppy tanks with minimal problems. The number one tip that I can offer if you do opt for that type of setup is to try and get at least a 10 gallon or 45 litre tank and stock it with at least 8 males. I'm honestly not sure why this happens, but in my experience, the more male guppies in the tank, the less aggressive they tend to be. It is important to remember that behaviours like chasing, tail fanning and mild sparring are completely normal live bearer behaviour though, and it's used to maintain and establish their hierarchy, but it's very rare for the guppies to actually get physical with each other. If you already have both male and female guppies in your aquarium, it's highly likely that they've bred and there's baby guppies on the way, so it's probably a good idea to check with local aquatic shops to see if they'll be happy to take your extra guppies, and just mention that they can have them for free to increase the chances of them saying yes. I found that smaller independent shops are usually a lot more flexible and happy to take baby guppies because of how popular they are, and they can easily sell them to their customers. But the larger chain stores do tend to have to stick to their supply chains because they are more heavily regulated, so I'd focus on the smaller independent stores that you're ideally already a customer of and your face is known to the owner and staff. So moving on, we get to tank mates, and I only really like to talk about my personal experiences with combinations that I've actually kept rather than relying on theory or stuff other people have said. As far as I can remember at least, I've only kept guppies with endless live bearers, honey gourami, neocaridina shrimp, armano shrimp and neurite snails, and all of those worked well without any problems. Because guppies do best in harder water, it is probably best to look for other hard water species that will work with your guppies if you're looking to keep other species in there. That said, I honestly think that the best tank mate for guppies is more guppies. Not only does adding additional guppies help to reduce aggression in male-only tanks, but there's an incredible variety of colour available in the hobby these days, so unless you have an absolutely huge tank, there's a good chance that you can stock 10 guppies, one of each different colour, just to keep things as interesting as possible. On top of that, guppies are very active swimmers that are always on the move, and they'll swim through all levels of the water column as well, so there's always something happening in there and they are very fun to watch. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. Finding healthy guppies can be challenging unfortunately, but they really are an excellent fish if you can get some that are healthy and that can work well in so many different aquarium setups. Thanks for watching guys, I hope you found the video helpful and good luck with your guppies.